when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I wanted to think about kind of the connection between food and film, in a way, and try and think about what it is that the chefs want to know from the storytellers, from the filmmakers, and perhaps on the flip side, maybe more interesting here, what the storytellers might learn from the chefs. Goes both ways, and a bit of how technology kind of feeds this sort of whole multi-sensory experience design, all kind of captured in a book that just came out, all about the perfect meal, which for us, the perfect meal tends to be, most of it's about it's the surroundings of, it's not the food itself so much as the environments in which you eat, the music, the lighting, all the other kind of sensory stuff before, at the time, and after the meal. And I think there are some similarities that can be drawn out with the world of film. Now, if you go back a few years, when the chefs of old were trying to seduce our senses, delivering flavors, the tastiest flavors, the average menu might look something like this, just kind of a three-course meal. We've got some prawn and coconut cake to start, then maybe a bit of chicken breast, a lemon poussée for dessert. Just 3 courses. And I guess any and all of those courses could be great, and there'd be no problem whatsoever. The 3 standout dishes would be just fine. But as we've gone through the years, what's happened is that menus have got kind of more and more complex. Meals are starting to take longer and longer to prepare and to consume. And so we get something like this in the present day, just the Fat Duck menu in Bray, 3 Michelin-star restaurant, with about 14, 15 stated dishes on the menu that you get. There are probably going to be a few more surprises inserted in there somewhere. So maybe up to 17 or 18 dishes, a 4.5-hour experience, like the length of a very, very long film, I guess. And what chefs like Heston and others have realized is that they're brilliant dishes, but if they kind of give you, for 4.5 hours, masterpiece after masterpiece, people just can't take it after a few dishes. They kind of, the senses get overloaded. There's just too much going on, too many star dishes, and hence they've realized that you've really got to start sort of kind of curating the meal, having high points and lower points, kind of bits of tension and relaxation. And many chefs are now thinking of asking sort of the storytellers and filmmakers how they go about their art in order to try and pick up some ideas and curate the meal in some ways similarly to the way you might think about engaging other audiences' attentions. And you might think as a chef, you say, well, maybe it's all about, what do people remember when they come away from my restaurant? Maybe we just load the best dishes at the beginning, so you have that kind of, you remember the first experience, the first food that goes in your mouth, and maybe you remember what's at the end. That's what you can walk away from the restaurant with. And in the middle, who cares? Maybe you forget the stuff in the middle. Or maybe you go kind of the approach that we have here from Paul Bertoli over in California, who's thinking about how to kind of curate a 5-course meal. What order should the dishes come? How should they be laid out? And you can sort of see here his almost synesthetic dish design, where he's saying for him, the house-cured sausages and the paired wine is very sort of spiky and angular. And as you go through the courses of the meal, his intention is that the dine will go from those very spiky dishes to begin with, going through rounder and flatter dishes, and that kind of trend will be carried through. That's one way of doing it, but I wonder whether it's necessarily the best. So one thing there that chefs want to learn about is curating these long, multi-sensory experiences. They're increasingly about so much more than just the food. They're increasingly about kind of the theatre, the emotion, the storytelling, the magic of the experience that can be dining. And here we've got a couple of quotes on that kind of food as theatre theme that starts cropping up more and more in contemporary restaurant reviews. Elizabeth Carter from the Good Food Guide describing her trip to the Fat Duck restaurant as food as theatre. Or Gerard in the Guardian, I think from 2009, saying that for many punters, the allure of the Fat Duck is as much theatricality as it is gastronomy. It's about the whole experience and not just about the food. And what they're talking about when they're talking about the whole experience and sort of food as theatre is in part this dish here. This is the sound of the seafood dish that comes to the table looking like the seashore with sand and foam and seaweed and seafood. But also, on the other hand, the waiter will come with a conch shell out of which dribble some iPod headphones. And this dish was actually based on an experiment that Heston and I did together in Science Oxford. Experiments, a bit like you can take part in that Alejandro here is running outside, upstairs and downstairs today to get a feeling. An experiment that shows that the sounds that we hear when we eat do change the food experience. Seafood will taste significantly better when listening to the sounds of the sea, but no more salty than if you play restaurant kind of cutlery noises, if you play modern jazz, squawking farmyard chickens, whatever else, the sound of the sea makes the seafood taste better. And in this way, it's one of the first examples, I think, of sort of technology being brought to the dining table. In this case, technology from the chef that enhances your meal experience by having the kind of sonic soundtrack or backdrop for that experience. And probably here, too, there might be an analogy in the way that one's sort of experience of film will be dramatically changed simply by the kind of auditory accompaniment or backdrop. And exactly the same thing, I think, is true of food. But in the food case, you can have maybe a little bit more fun with playing with the background sound. Here, just one example. Again, now it's not the chef's technology at the dining table enhancing the multisensory experience. This time it's your own technology. You're at the House of Wolf in North London, Islington. You've got a sensory tasting menu, and down at the bottom here we have the sonic cake pop, a bittersweet chocolate lolly. If you find this dessert is too sweet, dial 0845 680 2419. If you find it's too bitter, then dial a different telephone number. And the two sounds that you might hear on your technology that's now being repositioned from distracting the diner from the food to actually enhancing the experience is either this, and you might think, is this bitter music or is this sweet music? That's one of the soundtracks you could dial up to digitally season your dish. The other one is this. You might think, is that sweeter? Is that bitter? Sweet. It's obviously sweet. Sweetness doesn't really have a sound, and yet it does. There are certain instruments that go with sweetness, with bitterness, certain pitches of sound, and you can measure that in the lab, pass it on to kind of the sonic designers, creative agencies who can then make soundtracks that embody or encapsulate a taste, a flavor, play it back to diners, and enhance their experience. Be it in the Fat Duck in North London, using your own technology, or be it now if you're on British Airways flying long haul, depending on the food that you choose in the aeroplane, you can dial in to the appropriate track in your headset and get, should you want James Blunt, I don't know if anybody wants that, but there's some other choices there that will bring out the taste of the food, matching music for the dining experience in the air, but also now in the supermarkets with things like the Concerto app from Häagen-Dazs there, where you buy your favorite ice cream, you scan the lid with your mobile device, and then you can see some musicians playing a short musical interlude on the top of your ice cream pot. 2 minutes later, they wrap up, at which time your ice cream is meant to be ready to scoop. So here we have food and sort of entertainment paired together right on top of your ice cream pot. In this case, I think it's nice proof of principle that you can use this kind of technology to change the food experience, even for that person at home. Different music for different flavors of ice cream, though sadly they didn't match the ice cream to the music. But we hear that maybe, just maybe, Ben & Jerry's later this year might be coming out with music individually matched to their range of flavors of ice cream. The auditory backdrop, changing the experience in the air of your ice cream, in the restaurant with a sonic cake pop, and increasingly of wine as well. Anything that you eat or drink, put in your mouth, its flavor can change depending on what you hear and what you see in the background. So as of last week, we had the very first sonic wine bar opened up in Christchurch, New Zealand, where you can order a glass of wine and out will come the accompanying music. And that sort of pairing is going on all over the place, be it in commercial settings or be it in more entertainment settings. I'll just give us one example, this, from St. Luke's Church in London from about a year ago. And we had a quartet from the LSO playing pieces of music on the stage to about 120 people who were consuming, tasting the wine that we'd show would match and demonstrating that the wine drinking experience was that much better by getting the backdrop here. Sort of working one's way towards sort of total experience design. Slightly disturbing maybe as an audience member because you don't quite know whether you're at a wine tasting with some music in the background or you're at a musical performance with some wine to kind of keep you taste buds occupied. And it's a bit hard to know who's kind of the soloist and who's the accompaniment in this sort of thing. But it's an interesting idea and one that is expanding. And the final example I think of maybe what the chefs can learn is like the 4.5-hour meal here at the Fat Duck in Bray. That's 4.5 hours, and you can curate that into making a beautiful, truly memorable, sensorily stimulating, multi-sensorily stimulating dining experience. But it is just that 4.5 hours. And if you're paying £220 a head before you get to the wine, then you might want to try and prolong that experience, get more value for money. So in that sense, you might start to think, well, how can I extend the story from just the time in the restaurant How can I build up the anticipation before you go, and how can I prolong your memories thereafter? How can I kind of engineer the experience, either the anticipation, or kind of the memory thereafter? Because that is the thing that stays with us long beyond the 4 hours that we spent in Bray. And a couple of ways here that the chefs are starting to do this through the senses is, say for the fat duck, you might get a reminder card. So you book 2 months before you go. If you're lucky enough to phone up on the day, 2 months ahead of time, you'll get your table. And then a month later, a card comes through the post saying, don't forget, Heston says hello, and don't forget you're coming to the fat duck a month from today. And you sort of think, that's a strange thing. Why has he sent me a card? Did he ever think I was going to forget my once-in-a-lifetime meal? No, of course he didn't. And he's got your credit card details and already charged 300 quid to your account. So of course you're going to turn up. So the card isn't about reminding you. The card is there to perhaps deliver a scent, a scented card. You get a certain smell. It's sort of nice, pleasant. You're not quite sure what it is. Then a month later, you walk through the door of the restaurant, and the door frame may have been rubbed with the same scent. It's familiar. It's sort of repetition. Where did I get that smell before? And then at the end of the meal, you're handed a bag of sweeties, and that smell that you've had now twice turns out to be the smell of that bag of sweeties, the smell of the sweet shop that you take home and that you eat later. So you used smell there to accentuate the experience from 4 hours to a month before and a long time thereafter. And he's doing it sort of that sort of the low-tech way in a way with a bag of sweeties, but others are doing a more high-tech version of this. So now we're over in Mugaritz in Spain, and the chef there is thinking about how to build up the anticipation before you go for the dinner. And here we have one of the plug-in scenties for your mobile devices that can release scent. So before you go into the restaurant, you can sort of check in, see the sorts of dishes you might get, and experience the smells as you see the diners rhythmically kind of grinding the spices, which is one of the dishes in the restaurant. You can see there on the screen, get the smell that they smell, use the technology again to try and extend or the experience. And all this use of scent, be it on the door frame, be it in the app that comes to you beforehand, or be it Heston's assistant squirting the spray over your food, is all kind of very futurist in a way. And for us in the lab in Oxford, kind of people like F.T. Marinetti and his futurist manifesto or manifestos are kind of inspiration. So 100 years ago, they were thinking about how to make life more multisensorily exciting. And they were organizing dinners where you'd eat frogs' legs to the sound of croaking frogs. That's the sound of the sea 80 years earlier. They were also thinking about dinners with perfume. And here we have meals. Meals were to be eaten to the accompaniment of perfumes, to be sprayed over the diners who, fork in the right hand, would stroke meanwhile with the left some suitable substance, velvet, silk, or emery paper. Even better if you were wearing a tactile gym jams. And the idea was you'd all be sitting there, all with your tactile pajamas on, eating the food, and then rubbing your next-door neighbor to get the full kind of experience, engaging all the senses with the smell of the perfume, the feel of the texture, and the food in your mouth. So they were thinking about multisensory design 100 years ago for dining. They were also thinking about how to make the sort of the cinema experience more engaging through smell and other types of cues as well. Okay. So how might things start to go the other way? What might the storyteller get from the chef? So I guess as far back as we can go, in a way, people have realized that the more senses you bring into an experience or a story, the richer it will hopefully be, the more memorable. So it could be in the Sistine Chapel with the kind of the specially secret music, the Miserere, designed only to be heard in that space, and together the beautiful kind of paintings on the walls and ceilings with those angelic voices together, that creates a much richer kind of experience than either the sounds or the visuals alone. And certainly, I suppose, in the world of film, once upon a time, just like the paintings there, films made no noise. And we can see the addition of sound, how much richer, I guess, the cinema experience was as a result of bringing in two senses. And then, of course, you want to go beyond that. You want to start thinking about, what about a third sense? 3D, wouldn't that make film experience better? And it could be Avatar, it could be Alice in Wonderland, say. And in fact, why stop there? Why not go to 4D, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10, or at least according to the Wikipedia page, 11 or 15-dimensional cinema. I can guess what the fourth and fifth might be. It'll be the vibrating chairs. It might be the scent squirted from your seat rest, perhaps, to deliver the fifth sense, but where the other 10 come from, who really knows? So there's kind of there's a desire there to engage more senses in the filmic experience, and yet somehow it just never seems to quite work. It never seems to quite carry through in the sort of these smelloramas and were there, and then they went, and there's movies with headsets to get the 3D vision. It sort of maybe seems like more hassle than, in some sense, it is worth. But there has to be something in there. There has to be something about engaging the more emotional of our senses, and that's where I think where kind of the chefs come in, because they are kind of experts specifically in taste and smell and touch or texture. Those are kind of three of our much more emotional senses, whereas what we see and what we hear are kind of pretty much kind of the rational, logical senses, but not so directly connected with emotion. So hopefully, from the artists like Ferran Adria, from Heston Blumenthal's and others, who really do think about cooking and dining as a multi-sensory art, we can figure out how it is to better engage those lower senses and hence make them more valuable as a part of the storytelling type experience. I think maybe the problem with film is not restricted to that. This is kind of the patent application, 1962, Morten Heilig, for the very first Sensorama kind of virtual reality device. We've got sort of 3D visuals in there. Your chair can vibrate. And so he could create a kind of the experience of you riding your motorbike through Brooklyn. And we've got the visuals, we've got the vibrations as you hit the holes in the road. He was pumping out smells of the city, trying to engage the senses. Again, that's over 50 years old, but somehow that kind of multisensory VR, by and large, hasn't caught on as much as it should. There are subtle examples, odd examples, where it's valuable, but not so many. Here, kind of my favorite one of just the importance of bringing smell into the experience. Turns out to be important if you're training kind of soldiers for action, surgeons who have to work in Afghanistan and other places. Then you can kind of capture the sounds and the sights of the place. But if you actually catch the temperature and also the smells, then it becomes a much more immersive experience, and hence the soldiers and the surgeons are much better prepared when they go into the battlefield for the whole multisensory thing. Again, engaging a lower sense and doing so to capture something that you couldn't get no matter how well you stimulated the others. And in these cases, it can be simple stuff. In the Heilig simulator, it was just a fan, one of those €1 little plastic fans. If that blows on your face when you're accelerating down the street, that's what it takes to make something much more immersive. And we work with people who have $20, $100 million simulators, some of the best in the world, for driving simulation, and they've realized $100 million on the visuals, on the sound, and just that €2 fan blowing on the face can create so much more presence and immersion. So here's how it's happening. Here are the multisensory experience designers, the chefs playing to all 5 senses, not just in your mouth, but also in the environments. This is kind of the place, I think, where you can really play, figure out what works. It's kind of like Formula One, in a way. It starts whizzing around the tracks. 1 year we'll be in the high street. The best of those ideas a year later. Some of the best ideas from the top of the multisensory experience design that is today's restaurants, top-end restaurants, will, I think, transfer to the high street, the home, and the air soon. Just a couple of examples. Here we have Ultraviolet in Shanghai. Paul Paré, French chef serving fish and chips. So it's English dish, supposedly. So what does he do? He projects a British flag on the table. It's England, so it could be Dublin. It's kind of raining on the walls. We have the sounds of the sea, of course, because you know that enhances the taste of the seafood, followed up by the sound of the Beatles. Here we are in Ibiza, Sublimotion, £1,200 a head for dinner. Of course, it can't just be about the food at those prices. It's all about the experience. Again, a curated experience where for each course they're having different kind of visuals, different soundscapes. They are injecting fragrance into the experience. In some cases, they may be vibrating the table as well, all designed to create that really multisensory type engaging experience. And you sort of end up with these places. I think they work. People are willing to pay for these kind of experiences. By adding the extra senses, you do get something more that people talk about, come back for if they can. And you sort of find yourself in a place like this, which, say, is that a restaurant? Or is that a science lab? It's kind of hard to tell, really. It's got temperature control. You can vibrate the tables in here. Kind of a scientific experimental kitchen where you can see what matters in terms of lighting, music, and everything else. A whole space for experiential, experimental, and most definitely multisensory stimulation. And that's kind of the place that we like as psychologists to work most. So just to wrap up, the kind of experiments we want to do, we'd love to do experiments at the £1,200 a head sublimotion or go up to Shanghai to ultraviolet, but it's going to be hard to get enough bookings to make our stats significant. So instead what we do is kind of multi-sensory experience design, inspired by those restaurants, but played out in London, say, in events like this, a sensorium, where we give people things to eat and to drink. We then change the lighting, change the smell. In this case, you're in the room at the top with the sounds of the English summer. How grassy does your whiskey taste? How sweet? How woody? We then take you to a different room, give you the same experience in mouth, but a very different experience to your mind. We have a sweet room with everything round, with a tinkling high pitch. That's the sweet sounds we heard earlier. Again, how grassy, how sweet, how woody is the whiskey. And finally, you're in the woody room with a smell of wood, with dead trees, with stressed wood. And no surprises, your experience of what's in the glass changes by about 15 to 20% simply as a function of the environment which you're in. Even when you know you're holding the same glass, it still changes you. And the very last, augmenting the experience. Just a couple of examples of where the future might be going. Here, this came out a couple of weeks ago, kind of Project Nourished VR. Does it really work? I don't know. Once you have to have the mini skirt to kind of advertise your product, you think, be suspicious here. It can't really be about the food. But what this allows you to do is, if you ever wondered what it might be like to eat cheesecake on Mars, well, here you can. Put the headset on, and away you go. But for us, it has to be, I think, this instead. It's augmented experience, but this time people eating sushi, real sushi on the left, virtual sushi on the right, using augmented reality headset that you can also watch your movies in, a Sony headset bought online. Great, very vivid augmented experiences of fish that might be too expensive to buy, that might have been no longer available. That could be the future. So for us, ultimately, we think this kind of the interaction between storytelling and culinary science and arts is a fascinating one at which the kind of psychologists can play their role, helping to measure the impact of all those senses on the experience, and that we, in contrast to the futurists of a century ago, have the advantage that technology is facilitating that link. All the things that the futurists wanted to do, the sense, the sprays, the feels, the lights, we can now do through handheld and other technologies. And just if you think about what's possible in terms of augmented reality sushi, or even just taking your tablet, they come nowadays waterproof, so you could stick it in the dishwasher. How you might tell stories about the food that you're serving, and the plate becomes kind of the screen, is an interesting idea that some chefs are starting to play with and may help to create kind of a stronger narrative theme and hence a more memorable experience. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for your attention.